On Friday night, August 23, 2013, members of AFT met up at the AFT office in Rocky Hill and a commuter lot in Milford to take a bus down to Washington, D.C. to commemorate the 1963 March on Washington. Armed with t-shirts, signs, and water, the members boarded the bus around midnight for the long drive to Washington to attend the 8 a.m. rally. Before that, AFT Connecticut had a chance to meet up with some labor leaders and activists who attended the march 50 years ago. Here is what they had to say.
In 1963, I had just turned 13 on August the 8th.
I was 14.
30.
I was 15. I was about to enter my junior year in high school.
I was 13 years old.
About 38.
21.
I was 24 years old, so I'm 74 now.
I was 16, and I was selected to be the family representative to go. And I went with my girlfriend, Maya Hasegawa, and we together had formed a little group called Youth for Peace. And we would picket in front of Woolworths because they refused to allow African Americans to sit at the lunch counter. And we were just generally involved in our community and the civil rights movement. And so at 16, off we went as a team to Washington.
I felt like we were being treated well on that block. But when I got out of that block and went to Mississippi to visit some of my mother's people, I saw a lot down there and how they treated the different races. If you happen to look at my mother was very light, and her sister could pass for white. And we were in Mississippi, and they went to use the restroom, and I ran behind them, and a white gentleman grabbed me, lifted me up, and said, "Where are you going, little nigger?" And I said, "To the bathroom." "You can't go in there. You have to go in that bathroom." And my mother and her sister came out, and they gave the man holy hell. And they said to the man, "That's my daughter, and that's my niece. Why are you treating her like that?" And after we got out of that situation, I went back to the car and I asked them, "Why couldn't I go in the bathroom with you?"
Well, groups of us in small numbers, 7, 8, 9 people at the most, went into the bus stations and Fairway Station and the Greyhound Station in Jackson, Mississippi, and whites went into the black waiting room, and I went into the white waiting room, and we were arrested for that. And we were going directly saying to Southerners, "We have a right to be here, and this is the way it's going to be. And even if you put us in jail, we'll continue coming back."
My father was an avid, person who listened to the radio. We didn't have television. And I would listen to a couple of things with him when Martin Luther King was speaking and all the uproar and the trouble that was going on. And as a 13-year-old, I was just inquisitive, and I kept asking my dad, "Why are they arguing and why are they doing this?" And so he told me. So when I heard that Martin Luther King was going to be in Washington, and my father and a couple of his tenants were talking about it, they said they were going down. So I begged my dad if I could go with them.
I felt very honored to be able to go. I remember that even at 16 years old, because the radio and the newspapers were filled with, they were blaring that there was going to be a lot of bloodshed in Washington. It was going to be a horrible experience, and stay away. And I guess because my parents come out of the labor and civil rights movement, the Communist Party, and so they're completely committed to equality and had an idea about the significance of this march. They did. And so we discussed it and felt that this was a way of trying to keep people from going.
Well, despite the odds, and if you look back, there were odds against that it always going to be this, and it wasn't going to work, or there was going to be a problem. You know, it means you go ahead, you go forward, that things can be won, and we have a black president. Who would have thought, right? So, you know, it was a sense of there's struggle, but there's also things to be won.
But I could see as we went on the march to see the bus had black, brown, and white folks on it. And coming into Washington, I lived around Washington later, I may have been New York or Rhode Island Avenue. As we came into the city, there were people with signs welcoming us.
And there was a place to pick up the signs, and everybody was given a little button, and there was a sense of cohesion that we were all in this together. People started singing the anthems of the Civil Rights Movement, the We Shall Overcome and Oh Freedom and things of that sort, as we were marching towards the Lincoln Memorial and getting ready for the speeches, the first one being A. Philip Randolph.
You could tell somebody something about it, but if you weren't there, I mean, even looking at the old, you know, the TV film reels or whatever, it just you see it, but it's like if you weren't there, you really didn't live it.
It was over 210,000 people there, and there wasn't so much of an argument that I witnessed that day. And I remember I was sitting up front and towards the right of where I was sitting, no more than about 15 or 20 feet. That's when the celebrities were coming in. They were coming up the side there, and I saw different people. I saw Burt Lancaster, and like I said before, I saw James Garner, who used to play Maverick, holding Diane Carroll by the hand, dragging her up the side, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier. It was just exciting to see all these different people that were there, you know, so it was a very exciting day.
So we were way back on the side under the trees, and I remember sitting eating our picnic lunch and listening to the speeches, and we had a portable radio with us. And we talked about how there was a 1 or 2 second delay. First we'd hear the speech on the radio, and then because of the distance, we'd hear it coming from the loudspeakers at the speaker stand.
But I do remember movement, motion, people, great speeches, a sense that this was history.
I was there early in the day, and I was up front where all the seats were, and it was one hell of a day.
It was just amazing to see so many people from so many different places, and then even following the march to talk to some of the people on the way back to the train station, people that I probably never met before from all parts of the country, talking about the march and how it inspired them, and particularly talking to some of the young people. And that's why I was so inspired about the march they're having this year, because Reverend Sam Saylor talked about not taking down the scaffolding on Dr. King, and I agree with him on that, because I think they kept it up to remind us that everything that Dr. King talked about has not been fulfilled.
I was just looking at my memento from the march and noticed that on the back I had written down every speaker and every person who performed and all of that. And I remember Harry Belafonte for some reason. I remember King. But the most thing I remember was the people and the feeling. And we were just so outraged at the lynchings that were still going on and the poll tax and all of the injustices that were taking place. And it had to be answered. And so there we were.
I heard Dr. Martin Luther King speaking, and it was a real rousing speech, and everybody went for it. But I heard this other gentleman speak, and I didn't know who he was, and he had a voice that sounded like God was speaking. His voice was so deep, and I didn't know who he was at the time. It was A. Philip Randolph. He just spoke in general about things that people of color would like to hear, you know, about anti-discrimination and what it takes. He was a person that believed in the fact that he believed in organization, and he spoke on organization.
Well, then, of course, there's Walter Reuther, who spoke for quite some time, and it sort of brings to mind a number of threads which are not all sequential. But one is that in Detroit there was a labor meeting at which Martin Luther King gave parts of the I Have a Dream speech. So he was developing that within himself, and he sort of veered from the reference to the Emancipation proclamation of 100 years ago and came back to the I Have a Dream and embellished it. And that, of course, every single child that I've ever taught had better learn the I Have a Dream speech. But even more so to me, John Lewis, to me, is a saint. And when he spoke, he was so young then. I think he maybe wasn't even, probably in his 20s. And his passion and the things he wanted to say, but he couldn't say, now he just says them. But the fact that he was nearly beaten within an inch of his life, and the fact that he's now in Congress, to me, is extraordinary. And I have heard that he will be speaking, and that he is one of the few, if any, others who spoke originally. So I just respect him all out. There was a rabbi from Germany who was a powerful rabbi during the rise of Hitler, Joachim Prinz. And he spoke just for a few minutes about the problem of silence. He said, it's wonderful to gather together here, but it's silence in the world when we face things like this that really cause horrific issues and lack of compassion for humanity.
We have to overcome the sin of silence, where more and more of Americans have to speak out whenever we encounter any anti-black feeling, who dare to speak out, who must speak out when there is anything that is said that is against another race or faith or whatever, in order for us to live up to what we are as Americans.
You ever hear of hidden racism? As long as you don't talk about it, it's not there. We have to start talking about it.
We need to bring people together and struggle for freedom, for rights, for jobs. And just as people did that 50 years ago, the need exists today.
People coming together to try to right some wrongs, and people coming together to show that people from all walks of life could come together and believe in something and come up and try to make a change. That's what the labor movement was all about. You do whatever you can do until you can't do no more, and that's when they put you 6 feet under. What the heck? You're here. You got to do something. You can't just complain about something and say, well, it's too bad, blah, 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 and do nothing. You got to do something. I think that it should be something that impresses people and stays in their mind about what the march was all about to begin with, and what it is today, and what we were seeking back then. Are we seeking anything different than back then that we are seeking today? I don't think we are.
And perhaps, in addition to commemorating what happened 50 years ago, I would hope that the organizers of the march and the participants rededicate themselves to continuing the struggle for civil rights, for jobs, to deal with the issues that people face today. So it's not just something in the past, but it's really something we can celebrate what happened then. We can build upon that today and build from here. I think I grasped in some ways the issues not in the same way I would have as an adult. I understood the importance of integration and civil rights, and perhaps had a little bit of an understanding of the importance that labor was a part of that struggle. In my own way, at that age, I think I appreciated, at a 14-year-old, the unity there without any deep understanding of it.
What this march showed me, it was a demonstration of the potential of what we can do when we unite the interests of the labor movement representing working people and the fight for equality. And the march, it was a march for equality, for freedom and for jobs.
This was a chance to speak to the whole nation and show that all of these were really connected. Jobs, getting jobs for people, freedom, that they weren't separate events. They weren't separate things.
there's always been the link between labor and civil rights, and I've always, my family and plus my own activity. So I remained active in both movements. And sort of the march was sort of, both movements are important, especially to be together, because they both represent working people and different aspects of the same struggle.
I think that march was somewhat of a culmination or a turning point from all of the many civil rights activities that had been happening, especially in the South, but around the country. But that march was so huge and so peaceful and so strong that it was the tipping point for the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act to be passed.
The folk who brought us the message then were young ones. And there are folk who are bringing us the message now, and they're going to be women too. I heard that Eleanor Holmes Norton will also be speaking because she's one of the march organizers. Back in the day, the women were on the podium. They got some award, I don't remember what it was, for maybe work for the movement, but they did not speak. This time, women's voices will be heard, and that's good to know.
I don't think I realized then that it would be a turning point in forcing Congress to overcome the obstacle of the segregationists who were using the filibuster to block any progress, much as we see happening today.
I think it made a huge difference in pushing President Kennedy and then Johnson and the Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act and the Voter Rights Acts. Oh, I think bringing together people from the labor movement, from communities, to work together was what caused the government to change and to move for change. And without that, I don't think it would have happened.
I think it had a very, very big impact on me because I realized that with organization, it's possible to make a change on the side of justice.
I think the greatest impact was, when Mahalia Jackson got through with her song, all the people were applauding. They got very silent because Dr. King got up, and then when he gave his great speech, and then he ended with "Free at last, free at last," I think that's really set off the whole crowd, and it was a great experience. I think it, gave all of us the inspiration to go back home and really begin to do something.
When I got in high school, I led a little revolution about history and walked out of class and threw the class books back in the room until they taught us some black history. Now, that was something for 1964 and 1965 to talk about black history that wasn't even taught.
We have a very important election coming up next year in 2014. And we have very reactionary elements that have seized control, that they care about the 1%. And we need a Congress that's filled with people who care about the 99%.
America has not come far enough, but America continues on the journey. And I think it's really important for us to realize what just happened to the Fourth Amendment of the Voting Act, especially what's happening in Carolina now, where they want people to come at certain times and show identification. It's like we're sliding backwards into the days when Kennedy and Johnson were working on the Voting Act. Other things, such as in Connecticut, the huge discrepancy, we call it the achievement gap, between children in cities and children in suburbs. Other things that are really important are the gaps in amount of salary people earn, the minimum wage legislation we've tried to do in Connecticut. Things such as we know that African Americans earn about half of what white Americans earn now.
I tell my grandchildren that it's time for them to get up and begin to move about. And I think that, they need to come back home. I think the unions, the churches, the churches can play a big role as they have in the civil rights movement. But even the churches have been sort of stagnant about fighting for justices and the causes. They don't, and if we need to see more unity among the churches, among unions and among organizations to come together and really begin to map out what the next step is going to be. There's actually no way to get around a struggle, unless if you're going to make progress. And you can't just say, "I've made it." No one's self-made. Everybody that had made it has made it because someone struggled and fought for them. And our young people need to begin to understand and get that message so that they can struggle for the next generation.
There's a need to remind America. I think freedom isn't something that's static. It's something that that's alive and evolving, and you have to keep pressing on that issue.
It's a big country with a lot of people, but there's some real aspects of commonality and potential unity that can exist. And when I saw something like that, I can see what's possible when people work together.
So it showed, to me, I think it showed the potential that yes, when the people get together, we can move the powerful. We can change things.